Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's event on residential metro districts, sponsored by the Affordable Housing Team of the League of Women Voters of Larimer County. Via email, you received an informational handout on the League. Many of you know the League from our efforts to conduct voter registration drives or sponsor candidate and ballot issue forums, but we do much more in the way of education, and tonight's session is just one example. I would also note that the League of Women Voters of Larimer County is an all-volunteer 501c3 organization open to anyone 16 years of age or older. And yes, we do have non-female members of the League. We hope you will consider joining or supporting the League. Our president, Jane Hamburger, is here tonight. Jane, and would be happy to visit with you about our League. I have a few technical notes for tonight. This session is being recorded, and the recording will be posted on the League of Women Voters of Larimer County website. All remote participants have been automatically muted, and we ask that you remain muted throughout the session. We also ask that the live audience limit conversation during the session for the benefit of the Zoom participants. And now, let's get the program underway. I would first like to introduce League Board Member Julie Stackhouse, who will provide a short foundational overview on metro districts. Julie is the retired Executive Vice President of Bank Supervision, Credit, Community Development, and Learning Development of the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. Since retiring from the St. Louis Federal Reserve in 2020, Julie has become actively involved in numerous organizations around Fort Collins and across the country, including the Fort Collins Planning and Zoning Commission and Neighbor to Neighbor. So please welcome Julie Stackhouse.
Well, first of all, thanks, Trish. And I'd really like to thank the League of Women Voters members who helped put this program together. I will tell you the technology alone was quite a challenge, as you probably observed if you're in the room tonight. But we did it. So thank you for everyone involved. We're hoping the recording is okay because we know you might want to look back at it later. So we'll work on that too. So my role tonight is to cover the basics of metro districts. My expectation is that everyone coming into this session, whether here in Fort Collins or remote by Zoom, and we have a lot of people attending by Zoom, that we all have different basic understandings. So let's go ahead and do some foundation setting. And after that, I'll turn it over to the panel. So let's go to the next slide, please. The first thing that I planned to cover was, what is a metro district? So I'm going to look at my audience here in Fort Collins and just raise your hand if you feel very confident you know what it is. I'd say a little less than half here in Fort Collins feel very confident. So that's great. Thank you for the ones who don't. Thank you for being here, because that is really who we intended this for. But a metro district is unique. It's a special purpose government that provides at least two types of services. But tonight we're talking about residential metro districts. So the type of services that are being provided are most likely going to be associated with things such as the development of roads, parks, recreation, water, those infrastructure pieces that are part of a residential development. We are not going to talk about special purpose districts like school districts or library districts. That's really a session for another time. And we're not going to be talking about homeowners associations. Homeowners associations are different. They are nonprofit organizations that are set up to manage and enforce restrictive covenants in a neighborhood, or they may provide services and amenities. We're not talking about homeowners association tonight. So again, just to be really clear, we're talking about those residential metro districts that provide two or more services to the residential community. So let's go on to the next slide. Why is this important in Colorado? I think this slide from Zonda, Colorado tells the whole story. The data that is shown on the slide represents new home closings in 2023 through August that were located in a metro district. It's a lot. And the volume has increased significantly since 2014. Now, you may say that's amazing, but it actually shouldn't be surprising. This is the same period where we've seen very rapid population growth in Colorado. And of course, anytime, I come from an economics background, anytime you have an imbalance between demand and supply, you're going to get a change in price. And of course, in turn, we've seen rapidly rising home prices in Colorado because the supply of housing is inadequate. According to USA Facts, Colorado's population grew 8.6% from 2014 to 2021, which is the latest data they had available, while the US population grew roughly at 4.2%. So double the growth in Colorado. There are a lot of benefits to being in a growing state, and there are equally some challenges. As I did my research, the estimate is that we are currently 127,000 housing units short in Colorado. So if you're wondering why those home prices are staying up, there's a reason we're short on housing. Let's turn to the next slide, please. So why metro districts? And I've gotten that question before. Why in Colorado? Why do we have them here? I came from Missouri. We sure didn't have them in Missouri, but we had a very, very different economic environment in Missouri. The first thing to remember is that the expectation that exists is that development pays its own way. So if you go back decades and decades ago, local governments used to pay for infrastructure. That's gone. Now new development is expected to pay for that infrastructure. And in turn, that means developers have to pay for the infrastructure. But we have a couple of things in Colorado that are unique that I didn't see in Missouri. And one of those is the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, TABOR, which you probably know more from recent voting than for metro districts. And second, the Gallagher Amendment. Basically, these two have provided motivation for the use of metro districts in Colorado. So let's break that down a little bit. When TABOR was adopted in 1992, it limited the amount of tax revenue that all levels of government can collect and spend without voter approval. So what that means is that it would be difficult for local governments to fund additional infrastructure and public services if they wanted to, because they would have to go to the voters for approval. Now, I don't want to guess necessarily how you'd vote. That's a tough sell when you're building infrastructure for someone else's use. The other piece amendment was the Gallagher Amendment. Now, this was approved by voters in 1982, and it reduced the general tax burden on residential properties in Colorado. And the concept was to maintain a split in property taxes between residential and non-residential properties. There's a lot of math behind that, and I'm not going to go through that tonight because it would take a long time. But here's the bottom line. In Colorado, and I know this will sound very strange, we have a relatively low property tax rate. I'm not saying low property taxes because we have high valuations, but we have a low property tax rate. And if you want to go look, it's the third lowest in the country. So again, economics works. And when you have a situation like that, it creates incentives. So let's go to the next slide, please. Well, as I mentioned earlier, we have rapid population growth in Colorado and challenges with providing housing to new residents. It's just a fact. So if we could do the right thing from an economic standpoint, we would increase supply channels, and the new supply would help to keep prices, at least keep prices from accelerating, and ideally, if there's enough supply, to keep them even more affordable. But that's not easy to do here. It's not happening here. Of course, in Colorado, and I built a house here, so I get this. We also have this thing called water. And water is extremely expensive here in Colorado. So a lot of factors come together. So the bottom line, as I said, economics plays out as economics does. And developers have turned to metro districts to spread costs over time by using bonds to finance a portion of the infrastructure costs. You may or may not agree with me, and I know there's at least one person in this room that won't agree with me, but conceptually and practically, that price of the house is lower at the time it's built because you are paying for more of the amenities through additional taxes over time, and that property tax is called a debt service levy. So good or bad? Well, that's what you're going to decide for yourself tonight, but you're going to hear the pros and cons. Now, I will note that even though only a portion of infrastructure costs are put into the bonds that are associated with metro districts, and you'll hear more about that later tonight, you have to remember that that period of new development, that 2 or 3 years it takes to get a large development up and running, comes with a cost. I was at the Federal Reserve during the housing crisis of 2007 and 2008, and we saw 500 banks fail because banks used to be in the business of doing those land development loans. And some still do, but it's really hard. And so now we have bondholders that are taking on that risk, and they want to be paid for the risk they're taking on. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. Well, I suspect I've already got your head spinning just a little bit about the complexities. And as you hear more tonight, I'm sure it will become more clear. But let's just say it this way. Our comparably low property tax rate in Colorado, combined with large population growth, combined with inadequate housing supply, make metro districts an attractive tool here in Colorado. Now, the other thing I would note is that I know we have several members of different city governments here tonight. Cities ultimately approve these. So each metro district has to submit a service plan to its municipality or county, and that has to be approved before the metro district is allowed to move forward. And we're really fortunate to have Ian McCargar on our panel tonight, who was the city attorney in the town of Windsor. I got that right? Not city of Windsor, town of Windsor. Well, I will forever be corrected. And he served in that role of pulling those things through the city process. So he'll be available for questions. Now, that plan is important because it sets out the framework within which the metro district must operate and includes maximum debt limits and mill levies for the metro districts and the power it has. So once approved, the metro district has other requirements. They're noted on the slide. I'm not going to go through each of them. I figure that you can read them and look at them later. So let's go on to the next slide to talk about transparency. So metro districts are government entities. And as such, they're subject to normal government entity requirements, such as open meetings, open records, annual audits, and public budgeting. There are several specific metro district requirements, and that is a requirement to provide notices disclosing the name of directors. I actually went out and looked at that, so I know it's there. Taxing information and upcoming elections. They must also adopt an annual budget and file an annual audit with the state auditor. There are some things that are relatively new, though, and I think they're probably important, so I'll mention them specifically. Colorado law now requires real estate purchase contracts to include a bold-face type disclosure that the property is in a special district, and the purchasers must also sign a statement acknowledging that at closing. And specifically, they must acknowledge that the property may be located in a special taxing district and that taxes may increase as a result. So it's a new disclaimer, but I'm sure you, as I, have heard of homeowners who have been surprised about increases in property taxes in a metro district. And sometimes, maybe often, it's a result of the Colorado property tax valuation system, which is in arrears. It looks back. So you move into a metro district, you may be valued at, say, the price of your land, and you may think that's your property taxes. Your property is reassessed. Now it's valued at expected value. Your property taxes go up. That feels uncomfortable. It feels very uncomfortable. The good news is this. The new requirements under state law also require disclosures to home buyers that estimate the amount of taxes they will be paying after the home is built. So, and the value increases. So you may or may not agree with transparency. You may or may not agree that people read real estate closing documents. The thing that I want to bring forward, though, is that information is required now to be brought to the purchaser. You're going to hear the panel's views tonight on whether they think that will work or not. And that's part of what we really want to bring to you. So let's go to the next slide, please. Now, you'd probably be surprised if at a League of Women Voters sponsored meeting, you didn't hear about elections. So we're going to talk about elections for just a minute. The Metro District's governing body is its board of directors, and those eligible to vote in Metro District elections are called eligible electors. Now, here's the part that can get a little bit confusing. When a Metro District is formed, there are no houses. So, as you might expect then, the development entity is the sole owner and has complete board control and is making the decisions with respect to the debt obligations of the Metro District. Residents do become eligible electors once they purchase a property, but let's be honest, by that time, the critical financial decisions are made. So when you buy in a Metro District, that's what you need to understand, is that those obligations are set. This is really understandable from a debt holder's perspective, and we've got a guy here who works with the debt holders. I'm looking at you, Sam. And he can talk to you more about that. But that, again, is one of the things that is really important to understand, and you'll hear more about that tonight. So let's go to the last informational slide, because I know we want to get on with the presentation, and that's the Metro District legislation in 2023. We sent you a copy of it in the reminder email. By the way, if you didn't actually register with us, please leave your email with us, because we will send you a copy of this presentation tomorrow, along with a survey, of course, which we'd love to have you fill out. But much of what is on there was in the summarized copy of the legislation we sent to you. I'll just note one thing, which is House Bill 23-1105, which sets out a task force to study the issues associated with metro districts and to recommend legislation. So let's go to the next slide, please. So I am confident that our panelists tonight will do their best to provide you with an informed and succinct, and they have been told to be succinct because we can't go till 10 o'clock, discussion of metro districts, but we've also included a list of other resources. And as I said, we'll send you this presentation, so if you want to dig into them, they'll be available to you. Let's go to slide 11, please. So some more housekeeping matters. In just a minute, I'm going to be turning over the podium to Darin Atteberry, who I already have seen knows just about everybody in the room here live in Fort Collins. So I don't know if he needs the introduction, but maybe for our Zoom audience. And I do believe that the panel will proactively address many of your questions. But if it does not, we've reserved time at the end after the panel discussion for questions from you. And as a reminder, those that are on Zoom, please send your questions to questions@lwv-larimercounty.org. Those in the room, you have index cards. And because we don't have a microphone that we can send around, we're asking that you write your questions on the index card and then just raise it. And one of our league members will pick it up. We'll combine those with the questions from Zoom and hopefully get to as many as we can. Also, please remember that this is a live session and it is being recorded. Of course, if you can, please minimize background noise so all participants can hear, especially if your cell phone is on, please turn it off. And all remote participants are muted except for our remote panelists, and we ask that you stay on mute. So let's go to the next slide in introductions. I believe, and I worked very hard on this, to bring you some of the state's foremost experts on metro districts. And this panel was selected to bring you a variety of views. As citizens, we need to have an understanding of the breadth of views to make the most informed decisions. Now, when I introduce these individuals, you're going to notice that there are no developers on the panel. So if I have developers online tonight, I do feel that the rest of the panelists can represent your views and will do so in an appropriate way. I've also had a question come in already about whether the panelists benefit financially from metro districts. And I'd like to just tackle that up front. And first of all, I will say that Ian McCargar is retired, so I don't think he has any financial benefit. Our moderator is with a credit union, which is very limited in the type of land development they do. And we have two other panelists who, yes, do work associated with metro districts, but for which the financial gains are a very minimal part of the total revenues of their firm. So I hope you will agree with me that this represents a very balanced panel and one that was very actively sought out to bring you the best information possible. So I'm going to introduce our entire panel, but I'd like to start with Darin Atteberry. Darin will come up in just a minute. And I know many of you know Darin, who is now the Elevations Credit Union Market President for Northern Colorado. Of course, Darin was the former city manager of the city of Fort Collins. He joined the city of Fort Collins in 1996 as an assistant city manager. I met Darin very soon after I moved to Fort Collins permanently. I commuted for a long time, and I moved here permanently about 3.5 years ago. And I will tell you, he holds my highest respect for his balanced approach to leadership and his ability to get things done, even when people disagree. That is a real talent. Our panel tonight here in Fort Collins includes the following three individuals. Ian McCargar. Ian, you want to raise your hand? Thank you. Ian is, as I mentioned, the retired town attorney for the town of Windsor. He has considerable experience working with metro districts from a municipality's point of view, and that's both the pros and the cons. Sam Sharp. Sam is the managing director for the Special District Group of Piper Sandler. Sam privately places Metro District bonds and has deep insight into the financing aspect. Money drives a lot of things as you get into financial markets, bond markets. Please be sure if your questions aren't answered to ask them of Sam. And finally, Carolynne White. Carolynne, thank you. She's attorney at Brownstein in Denver. Carolynne works with developers to structure metro districts, among many things. As I understand, it's what, maybe a quarter of your work, something in that area. But she does many other land development activities. Carolynne has been a great resource to me in my preparation for this, so thank you for that. And joining us on the panel tonight via Zoom is John Henderson, and we'll try to bring John's picture up here as I'm talking. You will see him as he responds on the panel. John is an attorney, a founding member of Coloradans for Metro District Reform, and a former Metro District resident. So with that introduction, I'd like to ask you to please join me in welcoming Darin Atteberry.
Well, good evening, everyone. I think the last time I was on this stage was when I was the city manager, maybe about 2.5 or 3 years ago. So I'm a little intimidated this evening, but I will tell you, it's great to be here. I want to start off by saying something about Julie. Julie, first of all, that summary I think was fabulous, and I really a few more of those, and you could be a panelist. The other thing that I want to say just to our community, this is the second panel that I've been able to moderate. I've been asked to facilitate on behalf of the League of Women Voters this past year. The first one was on affordable housing. And Julie was a huge part of that as well. And I just want to recognize publicly your work ethic, your competency in the way that you do what you do for this league and for this community and for Northern Colorado, Julie. So thank you so much. I'm really appreciative of the work that you do, and you make my job and our job easier as well. So let's give her a hand as well. So I do want to say thank you to the league for allowing me to do this. I think I can speak to 3 of our 4 panelists this evening. John, I've not had the benefit of knowing for very long, just as we've planned for this panel, but I will tell you, I've worked for several decades with Carolynne. I've worked with Sam, and I've worked with Ian for a long time as well. I want to echo what Julie has said in terms of the competency, the professionalism. These are folks who oftentimes community members may have strong disagreements with what they're proposing, or maybe the alternatives that we're looking at. But each one of them love local government. They love the communities that they work with, and they are community builders. And what I learned leaving city management and going into a credit union was that what I learned is that there's just as many people that love the place in the private sector, in the non-for-profit sector, K-12 higher ed, just as much as we do as neighbors and as we do as city officials. So I have a chance to talk to my former colleagues, and just remember, all of us together co-create this community. So again, I applaud you all for your competencies and for the work that you guys have done throughout your careers. So it's very impressive. My hope tonight is that we learn more about metro districts, and maybe we provoke additional thinking as well. I noticed that many of you you've already written your questions, and I love that. I might encourage you to think about, as we, over the next half hour, as we have our panel conversation, think about your question, and does that question change now based on what you've heard? So you get to scratch on the back of that side as well. Please write neatly, because I'm going to be having to read those. And so anyway, with that, also let me tell you, we have 4 pretty general questions, and we're going to ask folks to talk for about 2 minutes per question. So we have about a half an hour of preloaded questions that we want to share. And then if we remaining about a half an hour, that will be for questions that you have, and also that our online visitors have as well. Julie, I know, has already shared that, but I want to reiterate that. So let me start with, in order of Ian, Sam, Carolynne, and John. Ian, would you describe for the audience your involvement in metro districts?
Yes, thank you, Darin. The town of Windsor client for, so do we have somebody who's not muted? The town of Windsor for 18 years was my client. And I spent a lot of time working with district council, with the city council, and with representatives of the districts at the place where service plans, which are these governing documents that municipalities or in the county approves. Where I became involved in it was usually a call from a metro district specialist, a lawyer representing the development community, saying, we have a deadline to get something approved by the city in 5 minutes. Can you get it done? And I would roll my eyes and say, we'll try. And so from there, the service plan was submitted to us. We would refer the service plan to a specialist retained by the town of Windsor, appointed by the town board, to advise the town board and to serve as an intermediary between the city government and the district proponents to arrive at a service plan that we could present to the town board for approval during a public hearing. And so the way that worked was we'd spend anywhere from a month to 2 months working on a draft of the service plan. It would then go before council. So my number one responsibility when it came to metro district governance, if you will, was to start at the very beginning when these districts are just a twinkle in the development community's eye. Eventually, the service plan goes before council and a public hearing is held. The burden of proof is on the proponents of the district to prove that the statutory elements under Title 32 have been met or can be met. And the decision is made by council. There is a vote taken, and the service plan is either approved as presented or is approved with conditions or is rejected. In my experience in Windsor, we never rejected a service plan. Windsor at one point, well, I shouldn't say this, at one point or another, I've had service plans withdrawn before they actually formally went through the process. But other than that, what we saw in Windsor was an effort by the lawyers to perfect the service plan in a way that it could be presented, and then the town board would act on it. So that was a huge part of my practice for 18 years. The other thing that I was asked to do was to serve as a conduit for post-approval issues with districts. Oftentimes residents would contact the city and say, do something about this, fix this, whatever the problem was. And so that we would serve as a conduit, but not necessarily be responsible for solving a sister government's problems, because these are governments. Metropolitan districts are local governments. So what I'll say is I've had 18 years of experience working with municipal government to try to sort out service plans and also in some way to refer problems to the representatives of the district that I worked with early on. So that's my involvement.
Thanks, Ian. Sam?
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Darin. Thank you for including me, Julie, tonight. Really appreciate it. Excited to be up here and supporting the League of Women Voters. And supporting just general citizen knowledge here. I work with Piper Sandler. Piper Sandler is an investment bank. So we help companies and governments raise capital. Unlike a commercial bank, we're not actually a lender. We are more of a connector between money, capital, and opportunities, people who need money, whether that's debt, equity, bonds, you name it. I work specifically in the public finance group at Piper Sandler. So we work with cities, school districts, counties, states, airports, toll roads, any government body you can imagine that might need capital for carrying out its duties. One of our specialty areas is in special districts and tax increment across the country. So the group that I actually head within Piper Sandler is focused on special districts. So what that really means is what we do in Colorado with regard to metro districts is help landowners learn what a district is, how they operate, how our state laws work, bring in lawyers, bring in engineers, district managers, help them kind of understand the framework that exists here in Colorado, and specifically focus on what their capital needs might be and what possible debt structures might exist to help raise that capital to pay for the roads, water, sewer, parks, rec centers, open space trail systems, all the things that metro districts provide. So we were kind of the financial analysis and eventually the actual capital raising. At the end of the day, we are typically in a position where we're buying a bond. Our firm buys the bond from the district and then sells it off to third-party investors. So we're in that capacity making a market for those bonds. And then after those bonds exist in the market, we help those people that own them buy them and sell them. So many of you actually may be investors in Metro District bonds through your mutual fund investments, through direct investment. So we're kind of the financial component of that. And I've been doing this since 1999, specifically focused here in Colorado. So I've certainly seen a lot of the changes that Julie described in terms of how districts have become the tool for how we provide capital for infrastructure for growth in Colorado.
All right, thank you. Thanks so much for inviting me also, Darin, and pleased to be up here with this august panel, and I'm pleased to see all of you here tonight wanting to learn more about metro districts. So as was mentioned before, I'm a lawyer with the law firm of Brownstein, Hyatt, Farber, Schreck. I'm based out in Denver, although I do work all over the state. And the vast majority of my clients are developers who want to build something. That's about 75% of my practice. About 25% of my practice is representing local governments who want to attract investment from developers to build something in their community. And so I don't actually represent districts. I don't form districts, but I help advise both developers and governmental entities about what type of district or whether a district might be a good fit for whatever the goal is that they're trying to achieve. And so sometimes that involves forming a metro district. Sometimes that involves advising them that a metro district isn't the right fit for a particular situation. And maybe one of the other types of special purpose districts that Julie referred to earlier might be a better fit for a particular given situation. So I work closely with Metro District Council. I work closely with folks like Sam. I work closely with municipal attorneys like Ian. But I don't do specifically any of those things, and I don't form metro districts, but I'm pretty familiar with what it takes to form them, since my clients frequently want to know what does it take and how does it function once it exists, and how does it help finance the improvements and so on. I will mention one other component of my practice, and that is I actually have served a couple of times as that outside special expert that a municipality might retain to help them review proposed metro districts or develop policies around metro districts. So I've looked at it through that municipal lens as well.
Great. Thank you, Carolynne. John?
Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Very good. Thank you. Well, again, it's a real pleasure to be with you. I wish I could be with you in person. My background, I'm an attorney, admitted in Colorado, Virginia, Connecticut, Kansas. And over the past 45 years, I've represented developers, I've represented residents, I've practiced in a number of different areas. But for that entire period of time, what I've done as a private citizen has been this. Attend meetings, attend city council meetings. I've been very active. I've served on over a dozen land use committees in Virginia, Connecticut, Kansas, and homeowners associations as well. When I came to Denver, I got involved with a group who was representing citizen interests with respect to the upzoning around Dinosaur Ridge that some of you might be familiar with. And in the course of that, we had thousands of documents that we're reviewing, and I kept coming across these things called metro districts. I'm an attorney, practice land use law. I had no idea what a metro district was. After about 3 years of researching, digging, trying to find the documents and connecting the dots, I learned enough to know that we needed to recall the developers off of our board in Solterra and stop the hemorrhaging of debt that was being issued by the developers with no input, no accountability by the residents. That was 7 years ago. For the last 7 years, I've been doing what I did when I worked as a fellow with the Citizens Research Council of Michigan, getting my master's degree, and that is researching, educating, and providing options, choices. And that's what I've been doing, no charge. I'm retired, all of my Metro District, even when I was practicing in Colorado, was pro bono, free, no charge. And I probably spend on average about 50 to 60 hours a month taking phone calls, evaluating Metro districts for residents, home buyers, parents, real estate agents, and board members who are making the transition from a developer controlled board to a resident controlled board. All free, no charge. And what took me 3 months now takes about an hour and a half to 2 hours, because I know where the documents are. I'm familiar with the documents, and it's a lot easier than it was before. So I bring to this conversation not a developer orientation, not a represent developer orientation, not a financial orientation, but simply it's my money, and why don't I get to vote on how that money's spent? So I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, John. John, while you're unmuted, I'm going to start this next question with you, if you don't mind. From your perspective, what are the advantages and disadvantages of metro districts?
That's an easy question. I think as Julie indicated when we started this conversation, we're only talking about metro districts, what many call, particularly the attorneys, dirt districts, because nobody lives there. The only district, the only special district that really works the way it was intended is where the residents and the taxpayers who live there get together and say, we want to form a government to tax ourselves to pay for a dam, a sanitation system, a football stadium, a library, a fire station. That's not what we're talking about. But those are the only districts that do what they're supposed to do and do it right. I'm sorry to say, there are simply no advantages to a metro district. The way that metro districts unfortunately manipulate the statute, they necessarily depend, this whole financial program necessarily depends on taking away the right of the residents, of the taxpayers, to vote. And that is unsustainable. That is a critical defect in a government that's designed to tax, to pay developers, when the developers are the government and the residents don't have a voice. So it's a short conversation with respect to that question. I don't see any advantages, and we need to have a serious conversation about doing it the old-fashioned way, where the cost of the infrastructure, as it has been at least since the 50s or 60s, the cost of the infrastructure is part of the cost of the developed lot that the developer sells to the home builder, and then the home builder passes that cost on to the resident. I can go into more detail, but in our community, we found we paid for the infrastructure when we paid for the cost of the developed lot, $100,000, $200,000 a lot. And the developer made $75 million in profit in our community on a $41 million investment in the cost of the land and the cost of the infrastructure. And they still wanted another $60 million in bond debt just because they could.
Thank you, John. Ian, I'll go to you next, please.
Thank you, Darin. Thank you, John. From my municipal government point of view, the creation or approval and financing of metro districts has advantages because it is a way for a developer to pay for public improvements. And what I mean by public improvements are streets, sidewalks, pipe, stormwater, drainage, resource infrastructure, the kinds of things that go in the ground before a single home is built on the property. And so from the town's point of view, from the government's point of view, the government expects the developer to provide the public improvements. Our code builds it that way. The statute builds it that way. That development of land requires the developer to provide the municipality and to provide public improvements to serve new development. In that sense, from a municipal government point of view, this is a tool to finance those kinds of improvements. The other advantages, which are more in the nature of private advantage to the developer, I will let my colleagues speak to, but from the municipal government's point of view, what we cared about was making sure the streets, the sidewalks, storm drainage, water pipes, and the kinds of infrastructure that were necessary to serve the development were in the ground before the first building permit was issued within a development.
Thank you, Ian. Sam?
Yeah, I'll start with advantages. I think that to really understand the framework that Ian was just walking through, you have to understand the timeline of a master plan community. You have to the decision of how are we going to pay for this road, water, sewer, park, rec center isn't being made when there are houses. It's being made long before that. Frankly, it's being made long before likely the developers involved. Right? There's this massive effort in every city in Colorado to develop a comprehensive plan. We have saints like Julie that go sit on a planning commission and participate in committees, and council members and city managers that go through a process involving the public and deciding what do we want our city to look like. And they come up with a plan of how that's going to work. And the people who own property in that city can then choose to develop within those frameworks or not. To the extent they decide to do that, they usually are selling that to somebody else, a land developer. That developer is then walking into the city and saying, I see your vision for this property. I want to help execute it. What are the tools we have available to make that vision come true? For sure, those land developers are doing that for a profit. Right? This is not government provided housing. This is somebody trying to provide a project that achieves their capital goals while realizing the vision in the comp plan. But at the time you're having that conversation and deciding, should we use the tool of the metro district or not, you're looking out at a huge upfront capital investment for all that infrastructure that hopefully then leads to sale of lots to home builders, and those home builders selling those, turning those into houses and selling those to homeowners. So in a 1,000 lot community, that's a 12-year in the future, 15-year in the future time frame of when you're starting that investment to when those final houses are built. You hope, right? You hope that all works that way. You hope that you actually get the market absorbs those lots and those houses. So the advantage a metro district provides is that it gives that city an opportunity to say, you can increase the taxes on this project for the next X years, say 40 years, to some limited amount, say 50 mils, although lower in Windsor, actually. Cities make their own decisions about how they go through that process and offer that as a tool to a land developer to help facilitate the investment upfront in the infrastructure they want. And keep in mind that oftentimes these comp plans include requirements about what should those roads look like, and how many parks do we want? What kind of an open space dedication do we want? And how are we going to pay for the water? We don't want to use our existing water. We don't want to use our existing capital fund. We don't want to tax our existing residents. So the district is a tool. It's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's like a mortgage, right? Should you pay for your mortgage out of cash, or should you borrow money and pay it back over time? That's a tool you can choose to use. You can not use it. It's a tool that's available at the municipal level, right? Cities can decide this makes sense. We want to achieve all of this vision of our comp plan, and this is a way to have that outcome. And at the time that those dollars are going in, the available alternatives are pretty limited. You're not talking about homeowners paying for it in their house. You're talking about having to get that capital up front. And I think we'll get to that in some subsequent questions. So I think the advantage of a district is they allow a city to achieve its comprehensive plan vision faster. And we can go through some examples of that if that's helpful in the Q&A. One of the disadvantages, I think, and I think this has been the two answers I would put there. One is that there are some cities that do not want growth, right? There are some cities that have decided in their comp plan that they don't want to facilitate more master plan development community or new mixed use or seek retail. So, City of Boulder is a great example of a city that has decided that they are going to be very sparing in what kind of growth they're going to encourage. That's a city where they might not want to pull this tool out to encourage the vision of their comp plan. They might not need it because they don't want growth, right? But if you're Windsor and you have huge areas that remain undeveloped that you and your citizens have decided you want to develop, that's a pretty good tool. So as a disadvantage is that I do think it spurs the development of new house supply, which is, I think, usually aligned with the city's goal, but not always. Another challenge we've had in metro districts, and part of the reason the legislation has occurred in 2021 and 2023, is they are hard to understand, right? Mortgages are pretty well understood as a tool. Turns out metro districts are not that easy to understand, right? So a whole lot of people bought houses in districts where they had the roads and the water and the sewer and all that stuff was already there, the rec centers, and then looked at their tax bill after they bought their house and said, well, wait a minute, looks like a third of my taxes are going somewhere I don't understand. What is this thing? And that's a challenge. And then frankly, it's been a challenge, not just the cities having to face that, but the industry itself, right? Metro district managers, metro district accountants, board members, lawyers having to own up to that we need to help people understand what these districts are, right? So a lot of what's going on in that legislation is transparency. Started with the transparency of understanding the district you're in, and has just recently, as Julie pointed out, moved to understanding transparency of a district you might choose to buy in or not, right? That's a huge thing from my perspective in the 2023 bill, that we added disclosure of a district in a property disclosure before you buy a house. So you now can know for sure when you're making the decision to buy this house that it's going to include the cost of this district. And you make your own decision. Does that worth it? Am the amenities and the infrastructure paid for worth the tax bill that I now can clearly see in my property disclosure exists? So I actually think we have further to go there. There's some required websites that were a part of the 2021 bill that are still need to get more fleshed out. I think we can do better as an industry getting those more descriptive, populated more often. So that's an ongoing effort for sure in the metro district industry to help with the transparency and the disclosure. So taxpayers, homeowners are in a position to make that decision themselves and really understand the decision they're making before they live in a community like that.
Hey, Sam, you're on alert, friend. That was a little more than 2 minutes. Oh, so, Carolynne, just trying to do my job, man.
Okay, well, a lot of what I might have said has been said, so I'll try to stay within my 2 minutes, but I'm going to start with disadvantages first, because from my perspective, that part is short. Sam mentioned one of them. Districts can be complicated. They're hard for people to understand. And so when you have a district, when you move into a district, it's one additional piece of research, package of information that people have to wrap their minds around. And it's another layer of government. So if you don't like government, or you want as little government as possible, you've already got the state, you've already got the county, maybe you already have a municipality, now you already have a district. On top of that, it's another layer of government. Those are the two main reasons I can see for disadvantages. The advantages, from my perspective, a couple of them have been referenced, which is growth paying its own way, and specifically only the people in a particular development that is specifically benefited by the road, the street, the water, the sewer, the parks, the trails are the ones paying for it. But yet it still has to be public, because by definition, a district cannot pay for anything that is not public or open to the public. So even though the district is building all these things that are primarily located within a particular master plan community, those trails are still open to the public, and you can go walk on them even if you don't live in that master plan community. So growth pays its own way. The local government doesn't have to pay for it. Allows each house to pay its fair share over time. And I think Mr. Henderson made the comment earlier, well, it would be better if the residents sort of voted to decide, do we want to build a sewer plant or not? If you don't build the sewer plant in the first place, you can't build the houses and there will not be any residents. So the time when that decision has to be made, as Sam said, happens at the very beginning before there are residents. And if you don't finance up front the construction of all the infrastructure necessary to support the development or the first phase of the development, then you can't build any houses and there won't be any residents. But the time when they do get to make that choice is the time when they choose whether to buy into that development or not. And I think that is the moment where a resident votes by choosing to buy a house that's in a metro district and benefit from all the amenities and infrastructure that the metro district built, and in exchange pay the taxes that pay their fair share of it, or choose to buy a house in some other area that doesn't have those components. And I think you're right, there'll be questions about some of the other things, so I'll stop there.
Thanks, Carolynne. John, I'm going to go to you with the next question. What are the viable alternatives to metro districts to fund new housing infrastructure, and what are the implications?
Yeah, thank you. The alternative is the way it was done before metro districts and the way it's done in most other parts of the country. And that is the developer does what they do now. They get the money from financing, from partners, from a bank, from their own capital, and they buy the land. They don't have metro district financing before they buy the land. And in most cases, they don't have metro district financing before they put the pipes in the ground. They have the money already. The metro district is there to pay it back, to pay back the developer. In our community, they waited 11 years before issuing bond debt. Infrastructure was in the ground and well seasoned by that time. And in our case, they waited and the interest continued to build to a point where we had, I think it was $56 million in interest on about $31 million worth of pipe in the ground. But at any rate, the viable alternative is what they do in most other parts of the country, what they did here before, and they still do in various communities. Longmont, for example, will not permit solely residential development for metro districts. And that is, you have that $30,000 to $40,000 that the SDA and the Home Builders Association said it costs per lot to put the pipes in the ground. You build that into the cost of the developed lot. And indeed, it looks like they're still doing that. As I explained from the research in our community, we paid more than $30,000 to $40,000 per lot in the cost of buying that developed lot through the home builder. Home builder charges us for the cost of the house, the cost of the land, the cost of the pipes in the ground. $30,000 to $40,000. You build that into the loan, and it's a lot cheaper. And the marketplace works because right now, with metro districts, there is no shopping for what is the more expensive or the more inexpensive development or house based upon the cost of the infrastructure, because it's not listed. In Kansas, when we bought a house, they had specials. The specials were the cost of the pipes in the ground. So you had two numbers: the cost of the house, the cost of the specials, and you could shop that. You could compete. Doesn't happen here in Colorado. You have to dig and dig and dig to try to find those numbers. It'd be easy to put it on a piece of paper with an MLS disclosure, but they don't do that here in Colorado. And how is it that a house, similar house, and Westminster did a study, Erie did a study, Longmont did a study, same house, metro district, not metro district, cost the same. And in fact, they found in metro districts, it was actually costing more. You're not getting a discount on the price of the developed lot because you're not paying that $30,000 to $40,000 until later. I mean, you would expect the cost of housing in metro districts is a huge discount. because you're not paying for the cost of the pipes in the ground until later on. Well, it's not the case. It's not the case. The marketplace is working there. The developer is going to get as much for that house or as much for that lot as he can. There's no discount in metro districts. So at any rate, we go back to the way it was, and that is it's included in the cost of the house. You're not paying 30 to 40 years at interest rates set oftentimes by the developer. If the developer holds the bond, which we can talk about later. So that's the viable alternative. Doing it the way it's done in most of the other parts of the country and used to be done in Colorado.
Okay, thank you, John. You're officially on notice now too with Sam. Carolynne, let me turn it over to you. How about your thoughts about that?
You're going out of order now. All right. So what are the viable alternatives to a metro district? John just told you about one alternative, which is the developer would finance it, I assume through private means like equity or a bank loan or something, fold it into the price of the house. When you buy the price of the house, you're paying up front for your pro rata share of all the infrastructure. There's a couple reasons why that doesn't really work from a practical standpoint. I would say that's probably not it's not a viable alternative. It is an alternative. It's not that viable. One of the reasons is that it's pretty hard to get that kind of loan from a bank, as I was just reminded by some of my banker colleagues as we were talking before this. When you're talking about a whole master plan community and hundreds of millions of dollars worth of infrastructure for the whole area, that's not the type of lending that a traditional bank is going to do. And really, as a practical matter, it's going to come from equity. So it's going to come from private investment if it's going to come from anywhere other than a metro district. So that's the first thing. And it would be folded into the price of the home. And so let's just say for a minute that tomorrow, statewide in Colorado, we abolished metro districts and all of the new construction of new homes in large master plan communities with trails and amenities had to be paid for that way. Overall, across the board, let's just take the number John quoted of $30,000 to $40,000 per home, although we have some data that indicates it might be more like 50 to 100,000. All across the board, all new homes in Colorado would increase in price by that amount. Now, we, as I know you all know, because the League of Women Voters recently sponsored a forum on it, we have an affordable housing crisis, and that I think would be counter to the policy that everyone in this state is trying to achieve, which is to find ways to deliver more housing at more reasonable prices faster and sooner over time. The other issue here is really the timing. And it's true. You don't form a metro district before you buy the property. Definitely true. You put the property under contract, then you do your feasibility analysis and figure out what is it going to cost to develop this property? What's the development program going to be? How many houses fit here? How much of this property is undevelopable due to topography or drainage or wetlands or whatever? How many houses can I fit? What can I sell them for? And how much is it going to cost to build all the roads and the streets and the water and the sewer and the parks and the trails? And then you figure out if your financing that you have lined up will support that. And if it doesn't, and in a large master plan community, it probably won't, then you look at alternative financing vehicles such as a metro district. The last thing I want to say about that is the infrastructure costs the same, a pipe in the ground costs the same, but the way you pay for it can affect how much it costs in terms of interest rate, in terms of what time period you pay for it over, and when you pay it. And if you have to pay back a big giant $40 million or $100 million loan or equity investment within the first 1 or 2 or 3 years of a development, then you're going to have to charge an awful lot more for that same pipe than if you can pay for it at very low municipal tax exempt interest rates over a longer period of time. And so really the most efficient, the most citizen homeowner favorable method of financing is really through the metropolitan district.
Okay, thanks, Carolynne. Sam?
Darin, can I ask you a favor? Will you give me like a heads up when I'm 15 seconds to go? I want to respect our 2-minute time frame. Just give me like
your 15 seconds.
no problem, but give me a heads up before I go over, please. All right.
Promise.
Alternatives. I think as Carolynne and John talked about, I do think there is a alternative there of developers paying for it. I think the reality of what that looks like is in the time the infrastructure goes in, the capital sources available to a land developer without a metro district are pretty much institutional equity investors. And those, given the risk profile, there's not a viable bank market, especially now. There might have been 25 years ago, but today there is not a bank market doing land development loans for massive master plan communities. So you're going to institutional equity and saying, we would like your money to build these roads. They're chasing 20% plus returns on their money, right? So at time zero, you now have a 20% clock ticking. And then maybe 2 years later, you get to your first lot sale, and 7 years later, you get to halfway through your community, and 15 years later, you get to the end. So the price that gets added to your house is not the cost of the pipe. Exactly Carolynne's point. It's the cost of the pipe plus that return to that investor over that period of time, or not, which is really what happens, because that's too much. So that community doesn't get built. So we have less supply. Housing prices go up. So I think that's really the issue on that. A couple of points Mr. Henderson made earlier I just wanted to address. One is, this isn't at all unique in Colorado. All of the fast growing states in the West where infrastructure is a challenge have versions of this tool. Most of them are used just as often and have been around for far longer. Texas, California, Florida, Arizona, New Mexico, and as of 3 years ago, Utah. Salt Lake's going through similar growth that we were going through 20 years ago. Their state legislature just decided 3 years ago, we need new tools. They approved essentially a metro district bill in Utah for that purpose. Also addressing the Longmont question, they actually do allow residential districts. They use the tool very prescriptively. One really cool example of that in Longmont is that they decided they wanted to support affordable housing in a veterans housing project in a master plan community, and agreed to help that developer pay for their infrastructure through a metro district, in part because that developer agreed to deliver that affordable housing project.
15 seconds, bud.
Thank you. Called the Veterans Village. Google it if you want. There's a great story about it here in the last couple of weeks in Longmont. I'd say Fort Collins has got a pretty similar policy where they were very prescriptive. We will allow districts, but only when we're achieving our specific comprehensive plan goals.
Thanks, Sam. Ian?
Because I am not on notice that I've used up too much time, I want to go back to advantages and disadvantages, because I talked about the one advantage that municipalities see with districts, the ability to finance public improvements. I want to talk a little bit, again, from the municipal government point of view only, about some disadvantages. One is and it was mentioned earlier, the proliferation of local government. It's just a matter of having more governments within your government that causes municipalities troubles. And it goes to the points that John has made, because, as I said before, the phone rings in City Hall when there's a problem with a district. When residents, end users feel they're not being treated fairly by a district for whatever reason, the phone rings in Town Hall. And so that adds an administrative and sometimes a legal burden on local government to deal with these phone calls. The other thing is that every September or so, these districts file their unaudited financial reports to us for the previous year. And local government gets stacks and stacks of these pages upon pages of numbers in lines and rows and columns, which as lawyers, I can't even read. And so then I send it down to finance, and finance is busy doing the budget for the coming year. So it does add an administrative burden to local government to try to figure out, what are we getting from the district? Are there any red flags in these financing statements that we should be paying attention to, and looking back to the service plan to see whether the district is materially departing from its service plan? So that is, I can't speak to alternatives, viable alternatives, because that's not a governmental question. It's really a private sector question. So I used my time for something else.
Great.
Thank you, Darin.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Ian. I appreciate it. So the final question, and maybe if we can tighten these up so we have more time for participant questions here. So maybe take a minute if you can on this one. And I'll start with you, Carolynne. There's been a lot of legislation to address issues expressed by homeowners with respect to metro districts, including legislation as recently in 2023. And by the way, I think Julie has those resources in her PowerPoint outlined, so that'll be a good reference for you later. In your view, will this legislation address homeowner concerns / issues? What more can be done in that spirit?
Well, not on yet. So the first thing I want to say is it might be a little bit premature to be thinking about what else we should do. We've had a spate of legislation on this issue over the last couple of years, and I think we ought to give it a little time and see how well the things that the legislature has come up with do in fact work to address the issues that have been raised by homeowners. There's a spate of bills in 2021, 22, 23, only some of them passed. But, all the metro districts all across the state are still frantically trying to make sure that they're complying with all of these additional requirements, and I think we ought to give that a little time. One of the things our legislature isn't very good at is long-term institutional memory, and they bring back they want to fix the same problem again a different way every year. But in terms of, do I think it will address the homeowners' concerns? I'm not speaking from that perspective, so I don't want to guess whether the homeowners feel that their concerns have been addressed or not. John probably can opine on that, but I will say this. There is no other governmental entity in Colorado that has as much in terms of the transparency requirements as special districts do. Because not only are they subject to all the other things that every other local government is, like you saw in Julie's slide, open meetings, open records, annual budgets, annual audits, elections, all those things, which an HOA is not. I know we're not talking about HOAs, sorry, Julie. But in addition, there's this whole host of metro district specific transparency disclosures. And they come at the time that a metro district is formed. A whole bunch of stuff has to get recorded in the real property records. They come now at the time that a homeowner buys a home, where they actually sign a disclosure acknowledging that they are aware that the property's in a metro district. They come on an ongoing basis, on an annual basis, with required mailings, required website disclosures, required annual filings with the state. And if that's not enough, I don't know that disclosure and transparency is the real problem. So I think we ought to see if that works and then talk about what is the real problem.
Great, thank you, Carol. I'm going to go to Ian on this one next, but I do want to say to people who are online, we're rounding the corner on this. So if you have questions, and I'm seeing Julie frantically trying to maybe summarize those for me, so at least we can make some sense of them up here. But if you have a question, you really need to be submitting that now, please. So Ian, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Darin. From a municipal government point of view, legislation like this is helpful. In the municipality that I represented, we updated our code to require similar things because we felt transparency was important. The problems that John has described this evening may not be improved by transparency. Much of what the issues are in terms of taxation and borrowing and debt policy are fixed so early on in the life of a district, either in its relationship with the developer or in its relationship with the sub-districts that are often approved at the time a district itself is approved. Because of multi-district structures, these districts, they convene their initial meetings, and there are agreements reached between the districts for the flow of revenue from the taxation that will occur in the future. Those things are fixed, and they are the basis for the borrowing that Sam has talked about this evening. And once that borrowing is done, then things are really fixed. And so I'm not certain that legislation like this really gets to the concerns that John has expressed tonight, but certainly the issue of governance and accountability to residents is addressed in these changes, and I think from the municipal government's point of view is helpful because perhaps one less phone call to City Hall happens as a result of somebody having an issue with their district.
Thank you, John. Sam?
Thanks, Sharon. The 23 bill we've kind of hit that over the head. A few of the things that we haven't really hit directly are some of the conflicts, challenges that come up, and which is just a reality of metro districts. At the time we form a district, as Julie pointed out, there are no houses yet, there are no voters. There's no one else to vote yes on something or sit on a district board. So when our state legislature created the bill that created metro districts, they gave us guidance on how to manage that. And so what that framework has been for decades is developer representatives populating that board, filing conflicts at the beginning of every meeting, available with the Secretary of State, so you know that they are sitting there as board members and that they have a vested interest in the property. So that conflict is real and disclosed. And so things that have gotten added to that framework, which were basically best practices already in the industry, are requiring a city or a county when they form a new district to make sure the service plan has a maximum debt limit and a maximum tax levy of what you can levy each year. Because the party that's really the check to the developer at the formation date when they do that service plan Ian's talking about is the city itself in the service plan. That's where they put the checks and balances in. So those are now required by our statute. Another requirement in the statute, in the bill here in 23, is to the extent the lender, the lowest cost lender at the time the capital is needed by the district is the developer or a related party, that there's a requirement an independent third party fiduciary is retained to give an opinion on the terms of that debt to address any concerns with regard to self-dealing. Although, again, from a best practice perspective, developers are motivated to get the lowest possible cost of borrowing in a metro district so it can afford the maximum amount of infrastructure. So their motivations are not to charge high interest rates or do something different. Their motivation is to seek the lowest cost they can, which sometimes is themselves. Not very often. That's a pretty rare circumstance, but it does occur.
Thanks, Sam. John, we'll finish this with you.
All right, thank you. And I apologize. Somewhere along the line, I missed the 2-minute limit. And I guess just trying to balance the 4-to-1 odds here, I got a little verbose, so I apologize for that. All right, well, let me hit a couple of points as briefly as I can. First of all, the organization that I helped start 3.5 years ago, Coloradans for Metro District Reform, has participated the last 3 years at the legislature. And I'm sorry to say that there isn't much interest in Metro District Reform at the state legislature. You know, it's tough to compete with the money. It's just that simple. All of those fees that our residents are paying for metro districts gets translated into campaign financing, and we know how that works. So we've tried. We were very successful the first year. Whenever you see a bill, and let me say quickly, we don't have a seat at the table. The residents can't afford to hire lobbyists. It's just us, and we're testifying at meetings and making presentations like this, but we have not been included in the formal stake holders meetings in the legislature. So it's hard, but we've made some progress. The first year, when you see a transparency bill, there's usually what we call a Trojan horse in there. The first year, the 3 years ago, the disclosure bill had a Trojan horse to formally legislate to allow these agreements that were discussed, legalizing those agreements. But the agreements we're talking about are agreements between the developer and himself. I can't tell, I've got dozens and dozens of those agreements. All the signature lines on those agreements are the same person, the developer, signing on behalf of the various districts, which are supposed to be representing the residents. So that was the first one. We were able to get that portion of the bill knocked out, and we did something really good. They wanted to have disclosures of elections in kind of a convoluted way, keeping in mind we have pictures of election notices on fence posts out in the middle of fields. We used to have a scavenger hunt in our neighborhoods to see if you could find where the notices were for Metro District meetings and elections. Well, that's changed now because of what we were able to help get passed, and that is it has to be emailed now, and there are prescriptions for it. This past year, unfortunately, another transparency bill had a Trojan horse, and that Trojan horse was whether or not a developer could buy his own debt. And there's a reason for that. They want to lock in the debt before the residents get on the board. And Kyle Thomas from D.A. Davidson, a colleague of Mr. Sharp's, said that during the testimony. We need to get this locked in before the residents get on the board, because they may not want to pay us, and they may ask too many questions about what we spent the money on. So, yeah, there's a Trojan horse in this one. There was a competing bill. The real drama last year was the competing bill, House Bill 1105. I'm sorry, I've forgotten the number. Maybe it was 210. But at any rate, the House bill said you can't do that. They outlawed developers owning their own debt. We had an example. It was typical. The principal was $70,000 in a smaller district. The interest was $253,000. They were paying interest on interest for 50 years. This was a developer annuity in so many words. But at any rate, so that was the Trojan horse that got through. The sponsor of the bill said, you know, if you throw out this provision that says developers can buy their own debt, then the rest of it's not worth anything. The rest of it were the transparency things. Maximum mill rate. That's already in there.
Hey, John, this is Darin. I'm sorry. We're going to have to move on. I appreciate that, and I apologize. I don't mean to come off rude, but we got a lot of questions here. So let me do this. We are not going to be able to answer all the questions. I mean, there's a lot here. So there are some that are directly asked to individuals on the panel. So let me just say, first of all, here's what I will do. I'll promise you I'll read every question at the end, so at least you know what's on the minds of folks that are participating. And I'm going to just ask a couple lightning round questions, I think. Let's see if we can make some progress here. Sam, this question's for you. Do metro districts get a bond credit rating? Do metro districts get a bond credit rating, like A, AAA, so forth? What are typical bond rates, and what if the bond market dries up? Real quickly.
Ready to go. At the beginning of their life, districts have very little credit quality. Their promise of future taxes depends on growth, so they start without a credit rating. As they mature, they very often refinance and get a credit rating, typically topping out at BBB or single A, and then lower their interest rates and lower their taxes at the end of that. Okay. What's the second part, or did I get it?
I don't know.
We'll call it good.
What if the bond market dries up?
Yeah, bond market dries up is really just a change in rates. We've certainly seen that this year. Typical rates at the beginning, that was the other part of the question. At the beginning of a district's life, 2021, that might have been 5%. 2023, that's maybe 7%. By the time they grow up to where they are rated, they can borrow as low as 3% to 5% in today's market.
Okay, thank you. Are older metro districts grandfathered if they were created when laws were different? Carolynne, can we ask you that question? Are older metro districts grandfathered if they were created when laws were different?
It depends on which law you're talking about. For example, the transparency and disclosure requirements apply to all metro districts. But some of the formation things for districts that are already formed, obviously they can't go back and reform themselves.
Okay, so some of the transparency issues, Michael, are retroactive. So
I wouldn't say that. They apply as of this point in time forward, so they're prospective, but they apply to everyone.
Okay, thank you. Are there trade-offs between small metro districts versus large metro districts? And I'm not sure who's best to take that one. What are the distinctions between?
Yeah, I could take a stab at that. Typically, metro districts are formed at the time of a development's approval, and so they're typically arranged to the size of a development. So if the subdivision is 250 lots, it's probably a 250 lot district. If it's Centera in Loveland and it's going to be 30 years of growth and thousands and thousands and thousands of units, it would be a much, much larger district correlating to the size of the development and the infrastructure required to meet the development's needs.
Ian or John, do you have anything you want to add to that one?
If I may.
Yes, please.
If I may, excuse me, John, for jumping in. From the municipal government's point of view, what often happens in larger developments is that the district is set up under a multiple district structure, so that as growth occurs, the land area that is under Metro District, the Green Acre Metro District A comes online, and then Green Acre Metro District B comes online later, so that the district multiple district structure is sized to keep pace with the actual development of the property.
Okay, thank you. Are there limitations to the adjustments a metro district can make to mill levies? We're going to go with Carol. Carolyn does not want that.
You really want to talk about Gallagherization right now?
Well,
That's
only briefly.
pretty complicated.
Well, let's put that one in the parking lot. We'll just leave that alone for right now. Why are some neighborhoods in Colorado, presumably newer neighborhoods, why aren't they utilizing metro districts? And I know that's a complicated question as well, but does someone want to take a shot at that? And John, there you, I see you on the screen. So prompt me if you want to speak into these issues, please, okay?
Will do.
Okay.
I can speak to that one if you'd like.
Why don't you go ahead, please? Yes.
Yeah, we've come across some developers, some builders who won't use metro districts for some of the reasons that we've explained. And they're still building nice houses with swimming pools and tennis courts and trails and that sort of thing. So it's, the alternative is viable.
Okay. This is a really, really important question, I think, throughout Colorado, and I know it's something that Fort Collins is very intentional about. Can one of you please speak to the role of metro districts in facilitating affordable housing? Isn't this, and Sam, you mentioned earlier that Fort Collins, and to our community members, Fort Collins has a very prescriptive, to use your word, metro district policy, and affordable housing is spoken to in that policy. So Carolynne, you look like you have something you want to add.
Sure. So first of all, affordable housing in and of itself, like the vertical construction of homes that people will live in that will be deed restricted or income restricted, is not one of the things listed in state statute that metro districts can pay for and build. So metro districts cannot build the affordable housing itself. However, as some of us have been talking about up here, what they can do is finance and construct the roads, streets, water, sewer, and other amenities, parks, trails, etc., in a manner that is the most cost effective. And it makes it possible then for a developer to be able to offer some homes at a lower price point, whether that's actually in a deed restricted formal way like is required by Fort Collins's policy, or whether that just overall is keeping some home prices more affordable. So the way that districts contribute to affordable housing is really by financing the infrastructure, which has to be built anyway, at the least cost, using the least cost method.
Okay, great, thank you. This is a quick one. Do metro districts go away once the bond has been paid off? Will taxes decrease? Yes or no? Just kidding. I'm a lawyer, I gotta say it depends. Because when you form that service plan, it's like the constitution of the metro district, right? And it says what the metro district is allowed to do. The thing we've all been talking about is construct infrastructure, and that's one of the most important things that metro districts do. But metro districts also can be authorized to do ongoing maintenance things like snow removal and landscaping and taking care of the rec center and the pool and code enforcement of covenants
And so if the service plan has authorized to the Metro District to do those things, then even once the infrastructure is paid for, the debt service mill levy could go away or decrease significantly, but there might still be an operations mill levy to take care of all those operational and maintenance things that a Metro District is authorized to do, if they were authorized to do that by the local government when they were formed.
Ian?
Speak briefly to that as well. I see out in the audience a lawyer I worked with on a service plan a year or two ago. And what we did was, once the debt was paid, the debt service mill levy goes away, and there was a cap, a quantifiable cap on the amount of O&M, operations and maintenance mill levy, that could be assessed to the property owners from that point forward. So there is a way to drop the mill levy as long as it's built into the approved service plan.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Let me ask, does a Metro District allow for the cost of building to be shared by past, present, or future owners?
I'd like to take a stab at that one. I think it does. And one of the reasons that and this is really no different than a school district or a city or any other ad valorem taxing entity that is using their ad valorem for capital. When you move into a community, you're moving into picking up the tax bill from there forward, right? So you move into a school district, you might be paying the last 10 years of the bonds that paid for that school that's 20 years old down the street, or you might be paying from day one on the school building that's getting constructed today down the street. And you're making that decision the day you buy in. Metro districts are no different. So as you're moving into a community, you're picking your tax bill up from there forward, paying for the infrastructure that district paid for.
This is a really important question because I know that lots of folks ask this. There have been reports of abuses of Metro districts. For example, developers keeping residents off the board. Who do we complain to? And I'm with Ian.
Not your municipality.
John wants to say something, and then I have something.
Yeah, and I think John is probably best to speak to this, but I know who you don't call.
Or John, please.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the short answer is you get on the board. You find out when the elections are held. You and like-minded neighbors get on the board. In our case, we recalled the developers off the board, and residents took their place. And there's a lot of story to that. But the short answer is you're on your own. The state's not going to help you. The city, as you heard, doesn't have the staff. They don't have the monitoring ability. The statute gives the state or the city a blank check to impose whatever requirements they want to. They could make the grant of the Metro District conditional, and some cities are doing that. But long story short is it's you. You're the check and balance. You need to get in those seats that belong to you, and hold the developer accountable for how they're spending your tax money.
Thank you, John. Carolynne?
I want to add one thing. This is the League of Women Voters, so John's right. The citizens are what hold their elected officials accountable, and Metro districts are governmental entities, and the taxpayers who are eligible electors within that district are the citizens. And so yes, ultimately it's the citizens who hold them accountable. But the other thing I want to say is, just like all other local governments, when Metro districts hold elections, they do so according to the election code, which is in our state statute. And violations of the election statute are election fraud, and they are prosecutable by the district attorney or by the state attorney general. So you can report them to someone. It's election fraud, just like if any other agency conducted election fraud. And there have been some instances of that, although the ones I'm aware of, it was not the developers who committed the election fraud.
Can I add just one thing to that real quickly? We receive reports every year, but most frequently this last year, of the attorneys for the district / developer contacting residents who self-nominated to run on the board and trying to talk them out of it. and to resign their self-nomination because, quote, it was going to cost the district too much to have an election. So, just be aware, sometimes you really have to, pull up your shorts and assert your right to sit in that seat, and don't be shy about it. Thank you.
Sam Marie, and this might be for you, how often are audits actually done? And my experience is that they are often exempted. Can elections be canceled? So
Elections and audits are two different things.
Correct. I think there's a couple of questions here.
I'm going to try and answer both those in under 30 seconds. Audits are done annually. Required by the state statute to the extent you have $2 million in debt or spending $200,000 a year or more, something like that. So very low bar. Many cities also require an audit regardless of the state exemption. Many bondholders also require an audit regardless of the exemption. So the vast majority of districts have an audit annually. Districts can only cancel their elections to the extent there are fewer candidates than there are seats. So if there are 3 people running for 3 seats, they can cancel the election. If there are 4 people running for 3 seats, you must conduct the election.
Just like a city.
Just like everyone else under the election code.
John, this is for you. Look, we're out of time, so I'm doing my best to get to every question. We're so close. Isn't signing a statement of disclosure too late for the buyer? Isn't signing a statement of disclosure too late for the buyer?
Yeah, I mean, and the boldface disclosure that you're in a metro district really doesn't help anything. We proposed, and the legislature refused to consider, a half-page disclosure that has the key numbers in it, and this could be posted on an MLS listing. How much debt was authorized? In our case, $4.6 billion. How much debt is outstanding? When you bought into that house, you're buying into that debt, and nobody tells you that. $29 million. How much debt is going to be issued within the next 5 years? Another $60 million. 3 lines on a piece of paper. And I joke about it, but I think whenever somebody goes into a sales office in a metro district, there needs to be a big sign on the wall that says, warning, you're entering a metro district that may be dangerous to your financial health. Read the documents, demand that you get the documents to figure it out. But yeah, there's a lot more that can be done there. We've tried, and the industry's not interested.
So I think there are.
Thank you, John.
Oh, let me just take a quick stab at the disclosure part. The question, as I heard it, no?
Okay, more questions. Keep
Go ahead.
I would just say that the disclosure that you sign when you close your house, where you got 100 pages and you're signing every page in the last one, that used to be all that was required. What changed this year is that now when you're under contract, before you own the house or your earnest money goes hard, you get a disclosure from the seller. And in a new home community, that point is where that disclosure that John's talking about now is required. Massive change. And there's a website that has all the information John talked about, and there's an annual report that has all the information John talked about. So I think we've addressed those things.
Carolynne?
And that disclosure is required to provide you with an estimate of what your annual property tax bill will be, not on vacant ground, but when the house is built. And that is with the purchase contract. Right when you sign the purchase contract, that's required.
So I want to read the final question that we didn't get. Now, there were a few latecomers that we're not going to get to, and I'm not going to read here. This is an interesting one as well, and it's a difficult one. I think it's important. Why are homes the same price in a metro district and a non-metro district like Northfield and Mosaic, yet metro district homeowner has much higher burden, $400? So I don't know that's... would anyone like to take a shot at that? Carolynne, would you like to, or Ian, or
I could take a wild stab at it. I would say that, and in my experience, that is actually not true. That when we look at the like-to-like, where you have a community that has the same amenities, has the same scale, has the same infrastructure, like relative level of infrastructure, there's a massive difference between the two. And those communities that have nice parks, have the infrastructure at an elevated level and build at scale, are in districts.
So by now your head is probably spinning. We hope not. Actually, what we hope is that this conversation has given you more information, more things to think about. We've all acknowledged up front it's very complicated. Municipal finance I've pretty much spent my career on for over 35 years. Development finance is very, very complicated as well. And building community is a very complicated thing to do. And so I don't mean to make light of that. I hope that you've got some more information. I hope you've got some names and contacts of people that might be available to help given your questions. But I'd also say that, one of the things that Carolynne alluded to, and I know the League of Women Voters count on big time, is, the public process is really important for people to engage. It's available to you. And I know I was in local government for 35 years. In Fort Collins, I worked with 6 mayors and 40 council members. I don't know one of them that would have said, no, I won't sit down and talk about this issue with you. Not one. In Fort Collins alone, and I worked at 3 other communities. So I would just encourage you, if this is a really important topic for you, which I would argue should be, particularly if you're in the market and you're a home buyer, read the documents, read them in advance, study them. I did that. I do that when I buy property. I advise our children to do that, our adult children. But if you have feelings about this, you should reach out to your mayor and city council. And I've always said, whether someone's a 16-year-old high school student or here at the senior center, I've yet to find a city council member that will say, no, I won't meet with you. So do engage. And then I would also say, one of the things that I think is beautiful about Colorado is this really important thing we call local control. That cities are very intentional down at the state capitol that we have local control over our decisions. And so what you're going to find is that, as you've heard from our panelists, you have different communities that have very different values and approaches to metro districts. There is not a one-size-perfect-fit-all. Some communities think perfect is not having them at all, almost a moratorium on metro districts. Other communities have been much, much more liberal about their use of them. So for those of you in Fort Collins, there's been years of work on this very topic. I would encourage you to go to fcgov.com and look at what your local government has done. If you're in Loveland, same thing, or down in Colorado Springs. I am so sorry that we ran over, and I'm so sorry that we didn't get to all the questions. But if you wouldn't mind just saying thank you to our panelists, John, Ian, Sam, and Carolynne. You guys, I think we're smarter because of the time that you've given us for this topic. So thank you so much, and we're adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Darin. Thank you.